All right, welcome everyone to a special multimedia version of the ACFCS Member Spotlight, where we highlight the incredible knowledge, skills, and career journeys of our members and those who've achieved the elite Certified Financial Crime Specialist CFCS designation. We have a true expert today in the areas of investigations, open source intelligence, crypto analytics, and blockchain sleuthing. What I find also is a gifted speaker and writer, and someone who in short order has become a treasured colleague for me and true friend of the association. That would be none other than Ervin Zubic. Ervin is the
Hey,
founder of
having me.
what was that?
Thanks for having me.
Oh, my pleasure, my pleasure. Thanks for giving us all the great content you've given us and chatting today. So,
Awesome.
Ervin is the founder of blockquiry, a Saint Petersburg-based company developing fraud detection tools and other anti-cybercrime applications. He's been in the financial crime compliance, intelligence, and investigation spaces for nearly a decade. And he's been kind enough to share some of his knowledge and skills both in a written member spotlight and in this video. He also published with us a fantastic, detailed, and very practical story with us on making the blockchain more approachable for law enforcement, and has created a bevy of content that you'll be seeing soon across ACFCS content channels. So, Ervin, thank you so much for being with here today. I wanted to start out and just get a little bit of, how and why you got into financial crime compliance and some of your personal and professional philosophies for success.
Yeah. Well, again, thanks for having me. I think it was I want to say it was sort of by accident. I didn't set out to kind of get into the fin crime investigations or compliance or any of it. But shortly, I think after the after 2008, after the big crash and recession, Bitcoin kind of rolled out and really got my attention. I wasn't really there was not a whole lot to do with it at the time. It's just sort of novelty, but I liked the idea of what blockchain was bringing, right? And from that point on, I just sort of was like, man, it would be kind of cool to jump into it, right? But I didn't know how to kind of get into it or whatnot. And at one point in time, I decided to jump into a Bitcoin ATM business, and basically went from there. From Bitcoin ATM business, I kind of quickly realized how much more there is to it. And it was a Florida-based business. Kind of build our Bitcoin ATM compliance from scratch, and just sort of as the crypto industry kind of evolved, sort of our take on it, or on the business. But at some point in time, we realized that the ATM business really wasn't practical. But what came out of that experience was a lot of interaction with law enforcement, a lot of interaction with folks who may have gotten scammed or lost their
Oh,
funds
wow.
on the chain. And we were lucky to be able to parlay the Bitcoin ATM business, kind of divest of the hardware and roll into the intelligence, the blockchain intelligence, which then expanded into a lot more than that. So.
Wow. Very cool. Now, in your answers, I wanted to talk about this, and I really do love this answer because we asked you, who inspires you?
Yeah, yeah,
And, I'll give it a little bit of this answer just because, it to me, I found it very inspiring. But, you said you're especially drawn to high performance athletes who've experienced major setbacks, then
yeah.
clawed their way back, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally. And tell me a little bit about why that is so important to you.
Um, I think I think there's such a relatable piece to it, right? Is to watch, to struggle is sort of uniquely human, right? And we all have our stories, and we all have our experiences, right? And we all have our moments. And for those guys, for athletes or people that are more prominent, that's kind of on display for everybody to see usually. So it's fascinating to watch how someone handles that. I mentioned athletes, so we watch a lot of sports, particularly on the fighting side, and that is probably the most intriguing part is when you watch two individuals, kind of finish a fight and obviously one loses, one wins, to see what it takes for the person that lost, really, right? Because you know, there's not a whole lot that happens in our lives that and lessons that we learn in victory and success. Oftentimes those, at least for me, oftentimes those moments just kind of blow by, right? But the parts that really sort of kind of build you up over time is all the losses,
Hmm.
all the suffering that happens. And there's just something so fascinating to be able to kind of watch that and at times maybe see yourself in parts of it, depending on who it is, what it is, and it's easy sort of to find inspiration in that, right? As you watch people struggle on the big stage, no matter what's happening with you, you can kind of say, well, if they can do it, then there's no reason I shouldn't be able to kind of pull this together and make it happen. So I think there's just something really the thrill and the agony of the moment, right? That connects with all of us, I think.
Now, I think you also have a background though in like MMA and fitness. Why don't you tell everyone a little about that?
Yeah, so I actually got my career started in fitness, right? So I've always been in sports, and I've always either trained, competed one way or the other. So I think that's sort of the natural extension of the athletics, right? Of just sort of the sometimes the experience of the humiliation of a loss, or just not preparing adequately for whatever the match is, and then paying a price for it, right? And having to deal with the that level of regret, sort of, right? But yeah, I think that's sort of where my where my attraction to that component, right, and inspiration, always comes back to, is that sort of the athletic component. Yeah, that's right.
And I think at one point you mentioned you were actually considering doing pre-med, and I was laughing with you a little bit beforehand. The more I've
Yeah.
talked with Irvin, the more I see like connections to a true brother in arms here, because I didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up. Now I'm 50 years old and I am still not grown up, unfortunately, for my long-suffering wife. But, my mom was a nurse and I said, "What should I be when I grow up?" And she said, "Well, why don't you go be an x-ray technician, get into the medical field?" And I used to work out a ton. The body fascinated me, how to get stronger faster. And when I got into the anatomy and physiology classes, I was like amazed at how we operate as humans. I remember this line from a movie that we're a mass of messy miracles. But it's funny, like that never grabbed though my creative side. So I ended up going into journalism, of course, again, immaturity, Spider-Man as a journalist, Superman as a journalist. But for you, what made you kind of decide to pivot out of pre-med into these other fields?
Well, it was sort of just how the career evolved. Like I said, I was a pre-med major and a student early on, and my career was in fitness. I owned, operated health clubs for a long time, and as we divested from health clubs, I went into the private equity route, and then started looking at other businesses that I got involved with that kind of made sense at the time, and fitness just got to the point of you know fitness is a tough business in itself. I think it's really rewarding, but if you think about it, no one really likes training, right? There's about 10% of the
It's
population
so
that
much
really
easier to be lazy. Well,
we all want to be lazy, right? There's about 10% of the population that really cares or is interested in the product you're selling, right? So it just got to a point where I was like, that didn't make sense. And like I said, that coincided with the financial markets crashing and us getting through 2008 kind of with the business, and we divested our fitness business in 2012. But that was kind of the point where I was like, okay, it'd be time to start looking at something else. And like I said, the crypto part wasn't even on the radar. It was on my radar only from a standpoint of like, I really liked the idea that it what it stood for, right? And that was it. It's not like I was like, I'm gonna study the marketplace, kind of come up with a business plan and see what a good place to enter is. It was just, that was just something that, you know, kind of interested up in terms of passion. And then when I did decide to get into it, the ATM, the ATM business, I had quite a bit of experience with, lease negotiation, the signing leases. The ATM business seemed to make sense at the time, so that was sort of the natural way to get into it. I learned really quickly that probably the wrong reason to get into it, but okay. But yeah, so it wasn't really, it was nothing planned. And, I spent, 10 plus, more than 10 years in the fitness business, um, you know, and that, which was, very, very successful, very cool, very rewarding, but just got to a point, I think, where, you just kind of wanted something different.
Now, but you actually own several fitness clubs, right? How many, I guess, how many did you own? And I think you had quite a few people under you as well.
Yeah, so at the time, the ownership of the clubs, we had 55 clubs,
Oh,
across,
wow.
multiple states, and there was quite a bit of people that obviously were involved there. So, and then, I owned the club that when we sold the big business, then I ended up starting another health club in a performance clinic that was unrelated to it, and so yeah, a lot of time in the fitness business.
Very cool. So yeah, I always love seeing how people got into financial crime because or fighting financial crime or compliance, because if you ask five people, how did you get into financial crime? You'll get 15 different answers. There's never like one way. They went in the front door, the side door. They accidentally told someone at their bank they knew how to spell AML. Oh, now you're going to do it. Uh,
Yeah. Yeah, like I said, to me, it was sort of really, like I said, it was from the idea of crypto that really was intriguing to how I kind of got into it. I still always kind of look back on it and go, wow, that was always will always be seem so incidental. Now, the investigation part, there's another component of it that you know allows you to sort of stay engaged always. That's probably the most. It's probably the most for me most appreciated component is right as the investigations unravel, right, and you can go down rabbit hole, really deep. So those things tend to keep my attention, right. There's never a dull moment there, right.
No, that was actually basically answered my next question, which was, everybody they crave like stability and certainty and like this well-worn path. They can kind of predict the outcome. If I go here, I'll get higher on the ladder here, the corporate ladder here. I'll get a promotion here. Uh, but your philosophy seems a little bit different. But I love why, because you had mentioned that it's exactly that volatility and that kind of gap between what's happening on the ground, the vulnerabilities that criminals are using, the technology of the blockchain, the rules and regulations and restraints, but also that tension with also freedom to send money internationally, that
Yeah.
you want to kind of be on that vanguard. I guess tell me a little bit about that, but also kind of to me the inspirational story of why this fight is really a personal one to you to help help people find the bad guys and stop them.
Yeah. So I guess I'll answer this, your second question first, probably easiest. But as I was entering the business, it wasn't a couple of years into it, stupid mistake as it always is, right? I clicked on a bad link, and my crypto wallet got drained.
Oh my God.
And at the time, I was obviously fortunate enough to already be in it, and I was able to trace the funds to an exchange, and was able to actually get the exchange to freeze those funds for 30 days. But as most people probably listening to this know, I don't have the ability to recover my own funds. Obviously, that would have to come from law enforcement, from a law enforcement agency. They would have to subpoena the records, and then obviously would have to, go down the legal route. But at the time, and it was early on in the crypto business, I couldn't get anybody to look at my case. Right? No,
Oh
no,
my
nobody
God.
on the law enforcement side of it. Obviously, the federal agencies are just, slammed, swamped, and overwhelmed with these cases. Right?
Hmm.
So it's only at, you know, by just design, there's only a, handful of cases that they can jump
That they
on
can
and
take, yeah.
debate, right? And usually those are reserved for organized crimes, things that obviously impacting a lot more people and have a tremendous value attached to it. So the 30 days expired, and the funds have gotten moved off the chain, and who knows where. But it was that process really that I looked at it and I was like, you know that was just incredible, right? Because It's like, wow, man, there's this entire, there are millions of people out there, right, that are experiencing the same thing, right? And there's really nowhere to turn or nowhere, nobody to ask for help. And that's sort of the freedom of crypto, right? But there's also, if you enjoy the freedom of it, right, you got to be able to accept the downside of it as well, right? Which is there's no stopgap, there's no third party off, especially if you custody own cryptocurrency. So it was that moment that I looked, it's like, this is it can't stay like this, right? And there's a need for it, right? So I jumped in really head first from that point on, got immersed into it, right? And then from there, I learned early on that the fast moving pace of it, right? From how the funds are being moved to how they're laundered to how involved these investigations can get at the time. It was it really kept my attention, right? It kept me interested. And something that was sort of a bit trivial early in my career is I realized early on that I performed really well in startup situation, acquisition situation, anything that was really chaotic. It had to do with like sustained success. I noticeably underperformed. I didn't really know what that was, and what was it all about. I noticed the difference. I was aware of it, but it wasn't that until later in life that I kind of figure out some of those things that and the chaos is sort of where I can make sense out of it, what feels home, and that just happened to play well in this industry.
I think that also goes to, some of the answers that I really enjoyed reading is that you want to be where you feel your work matters. And I really believe that's why, to me, learning about you, learning about your philosophies and what you just told me, it seems like you are best in a place that you can see that your work is having tangible results, either on humans by helping people or by uncovering connections to illicit groups. Tell me a little about that.
Yeah, I you know I think there's sort of a score to be kept, right? And you don't win all of them. There's you lose a lot of them, right? But there's a score to be kept, and there's a way to sort of be able to measure your impact, right? And I think you just mentioned it, right? Whether we're working on cases that deal with sanctions evasion and kind of connecting the dots, how the funds are being moved around to different networks, right? Whether it's sort of counter-terror financing or narcotics, all of those pieces are that you are able to sort of directly um, connect to it, right? Based on the level of effort that you put in, right? And some of that, and sometimes when you are able to, and of course, a lot of those cases involve a lot of different people, oftentimes a lot of different agencies, a lot of a lot of different private groups. So it's not sometimes it can feel, as an individual exercise, but really there's a lot of folks, a lot of people putting this puzzle together, right? And there are moments of time when you kind of can add a piece that really significantly nudges the investigation in one direction or the other, right? Where you just that your direct work made that impact, right? And so that's an
Nice.
instant feedback that you're able to get, right? I mean, when you wrap up a day, and again, there's a lot of components to your day, but speaking of investigations, if you just ended up grinding through a lot of material with not a lot of tangible success or anything that you can point to, and you also know when you really pulled out some good stuff that can be used down the road and will probably bring this investigation closer to an end, right? So it's sort of this immediate feedback, right, of your work, right? That's really intriguing, right? So exactly, you don't have to look at the time you clocked in or clocked out or anything else. You just immediately know, right, whether your work for that day mattered, right? Or it all matters, I guess, but at the end of the day, you'll know the score for the day.
I really like that. I guess, um, looking back at what you've done and the cases you've worked on, I guess what are some moments that you had that feeling that, either you were working on a case and, it could either be the kind of case you worked on or some of those eureka moments. What are some of those you could share with listeners?
I think we could, speaking more general, right? I think a lot of the times it is, you have, you may have one piece of information that you kind of deal with that may have one username, um, and not and obviously some transactions that you go along with, and it's a matter of trying to connect that online presence, those transactions to a real world identity, and oftentimes it's just to a whole lot of digging when you may get to a point where you find a post or something that happened long time ago that's connected to that username that or whatever it is, right? Username or picture or whatever it is, right? That just then kind of opens up a whole host of um, you know different tags and different points of interest where you can start to connect the case together, right? So it's always sort of those moments where you start off a case with not a whole lot to go on, right? And then a few times you get lucky, right? And you're able to kind of go back in time and find out that you're able to kind of pull it together. And I always say, like, the people that I look for don't want to be found, and they're typically very good at that, right? They
Oh
have the
yeah.
means, and they generally have the experience and the ability to not be found, right? So you often have to go back in time
Hmm.
to 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 see if you can get some crumbs of information that will um, when they started their criminal careers, right? Because they were not that good at that time, right?
Yeah, you have to kind of find when they were a little messier. Yeah.
Yeah, you start digging in past, right, to see if you can connect some of those relevant pieces that you have today. And yeah, those moments always stick out, right? Like, finally you have that breakthrough. It's like, man, I've been looking at this username or this piece of information for months now, and there's this one obscure post or a website or something that I had transpired, 10 years ago, where you're like, oh, that might be the same person, right? And then it starts rolling really fast, right? Where you start to gather artifacts that, either kind of rule out that theory or usually prove it out.
Cool. And what are some of the kinds of cases that you've worked on? Is it more like sanctions or fraudsters or kind of money laundering or?
Oh, sanction evasion to terror financing,
Oh, wow.
narcotics, right? Uh, dual use goods and precursor chemicals.
Oh, those
So
are really important.
yeah, those are usually to try to disrupt the network, right? It's not just trying to understand who this one person is, but it's like how the network operates, right? Where do the precursors get procured? How did they get shipped? What are the shipping methods, right? How are they getting that past customs, right?
Mm.
So just being able to sort of kind of lay out the whole piece and build a case so that the, the appropriate authorities can then, take it and, do whatever needs to be done with that, right?
See, as you're talking, I'm trying to kind of see your world through your eyes. And honestly, the more you say, the more impressed I am. And I'm like, how does this guy do this? Because just in some of your cases, it seems like you have to know a lot about a lot of different fields and also how those fields intersect. You have to know crypto and blockchain analytics. Obviously, you have to try to get the banking piece or the physical movement of money piece. I mean, that's the on road and off road of the
Yeah,
crypto sector. But as you're talking, you also have to know like geopolitical powers and politics. You have to know shipping and trade routes. You have to know technology. What's a dual use item? You have to know what are precursor chemicals? Where do they come from? It sounds like even though you have made quite a name for yourself actually in this blockchain area, it sounds like you have to know many more disciplines to kind of see the big picture and put all the pieces together of these illicit networks.
yeah. So it's interesting because like I said, you don't for me at least, you never kind of nothing sort of that evolved was by intent, right? It is just you jump on these cases that started maybe on the blockchain, right? And then you just sort of go down, down many paths where you do have to understand. It does help, understanding historical context between countries.
Hmm.
That was one thing that worked out well just because I happen to enjoy history, right? And like it, obviously I happen to have the chance to live a few different places and travel. So the context matters, right? Is to understand the sort of the partnership between different countries and how that parlays into the shipping routes. Like, if we have sanctions against one country and they're shipping out things or procuring things, obviously then there's going to be a nearby country or the country that they are friendly with, right? Where oftentimes the goods could get shipped first, repackaged, and then forwarded, right, to obviously obfuscate the trail. So there are a lot of components that, even though things started on a chain, right, to your point, all of a sudden they branch out. And I don't, you kind of don't, you mentioned like there's all these components you have to know, but kind of going through it, you don't really kind of have those pauses, right? You just kind of roll with it, right? And before you know it, right, you're digging into some geopolitical reports to try to beef up your understanding of the country's politics and the work and the history of sanctions and the history of their sanction avoidance, right? Some of those things obviously will repeat. Certainly with precursors, some chemistry lessons that I hated come back, right? You
I
got
hate
to dig,
chemistry too.
but yeah, all of that sort of comes back and before you know it, you wrap up an investigation there, you're not even really aware of how many different um, how many different subjects you had to either become aware of or you were aware of and use to kind of come up with this finished product there, right? And not to mention the technology part now, especially with understanding how networking works and being able to trace the ghosts online, right? And now, especially with AI, just understanding those elements, right, which are just rapid, changing at a sort of insane speed, really. But I do want to say it's oftentimes, it's not an individual effort, right? And there's things you don't know, a lot of things you don't know, and hopefully you have enough folks in the business that you can kind of lean on and ask, or on the team that specialize in different things, right? So you don't have to be an expert in everything, and you can lean on other folks to it. But over time, you do start to learn a little bit about a lot, right?
Nice. No, I
Yeah,
mean, I know we're getting kind of close to time here, but I want to sneak in just a few more questions. One
yeah,
of them kind of more career related, but then lastly, I want to talk about some of your philosophies. Um, but, you know, I wanted to ask also, because the skill set to me that you have collected over, I say decade in financial crime, but really your whole life, this skill set it's very rare, it's very desirable, it's very in demand. And I guess that's what I want to ask is what should professionals, whether they want to get in financial crime, whether they want to be an investigator, what should they be doing now to learn to be a better investigator? Should they be learning about generative AI prompts? Should they be trying to get familiar with blockchain analytics visualization tools?
yeah.
What are some tips and tricks that you would give someone maybe either starting out or early in their career that are hoping to achieve the success you have?
Yeah, so the answer is yes to all of those things, right? So
Yes.
I don't think that if you're starting off right in this business, I it would be, I think it would almost be a disservice to just point you to a particular subject, whether it's AI or blockchain analytics, right? All of those things are necessary, and in some investigations, one will be more dominant than the other, right? And you'll wish you knew more. There's not a single time where I'm like, you don't go through an investigation where you're like, I wish I knew more about that, right? And then the next time it'll be about something else, right? And you'll just kind of dig in. So fundamentally, you will, the only thing you'll always know is that you just don't know, right? And
Yeah, I love that.
you always wish that you knew more about, whatever it is, you pick it, right? So knowing that really, um, being able to be comfortable with that level of frustration, right? And be naturally curious, right? And have the ability to, to put the time in, right? To put the grind in, because as much as this is a collective effort, right? Your individual contribution is often very individual, right?
Hmm.
By itself. And there's nothing really cool, sexy about it. You are digging in through a whole lot of data, trying to connect the dots, right? And hopefully you have enough curiosity and sort of stamina to just kind of go in one more hour longer than the next person would and dig in a couple more dark corners, right? Those are the fundamental things that I think you need to be successful in this business. Um, and then whatever your foundation is, right, will kind of translate, and then you'll add more tools to it, right? I think certainly understanding the basics of the blockchains is extremely useful and necessary.
Hmm.
Just simply understanding, basic understanding of networking is really helpful because that helps you understand not only the what type of signature can the person leave online that you
Hmm.
might be looking for, but probably equally, oftentimes more important, what kind of signature do you leave online when you're looking for somebody, right?
Mm.
Because you again, I'll go back to, you got to understand that people you're looking for are very good at what they do. They do not want to be found, and they have the means to deploy countermeasures quite a bit. So if you are not really careful in the manner that you leave your online signature out there, it can very easily trace back to you and expose yourself to a whole lot of trouble, right? So understanding networking to kind of be able to know what is a typical signature that somebody will leave online, and what can you get if you have an email, what can you get if you have a username, IP address, on all of those things. That's important, like I said, and equally important, being able to mask your fingerprint online, you know, and be able to do that effectively. So that is, like I said. So the blockchain analytics certainly, baseline networking doesn't hurt. Base level of accounting certainly doesn't hurt, because you're going to be going through a lot of accounting, and especially in the laundry cases. And then AI is sort of the latecomer one, right? That I think we're all trying to process as it's happening literally in real time. But yeah, so I think as long as you have the general curiosity and the bandwidth to be frustrated, right?
I like that.
Um, you're going to do well with it, right? I think if you are okay with, if frustration is your base, you're good, you know.
So I'm going to finish up with these concepts. As I was reading your member spotlight, there are certain things that I really enjoyed, and I wrote them here. So one of them is, you know, what you found out, kind of these moments that really kind of shaped who you are, is you said my greatest strength is actually my greatest weakness. That was one. And this perfectly segues what you were saying about, do the grind. These three jumped out at me. Don't wait for permission. Stay curious and stay uncomfortable, and be consistent. Show up. I
Yeah.
guess lastly, tell everyone a little bit about, why these are such kind of, bedrock foundational, precepts and concepts for you.
Well, I think particularly I think with sort of crypto being this, not so much anymore, right? But in the beginning, being so on the fringe, right? Where, um, it was the adoption was sort of, picking up, but then there were spots that I think, most people that are in this business can recall where, the industry, you know, took had big black eye with all the scams and big rug pulls and a lot of different just a lot of different crime that was related to or had a crypto component tied to it, really. Um, that if you were just getting into it and you were just kind of waiting for some kind of permission that your agency and your corporation was going to start dealing with crypto, you may wait a really long time, right? So it would be important that don't wait for your particular agency to jump into it. Don't wait for your corporation to start officially dealing with crypto, right? If you have affinity for it or any investigating components that you like, start doing those investigations, right? Look for different groups that you can come in and participate. And there are a lot of them out there that you could join and help out with investigations. And you may be brand new to it, right, and not have a whole lot to contribute, but you can start jump into it and start working for it, right? If you do wait for permission and for a particular segment to jump into crypto, you may wait a long time and really, just not get a chance to, right? And then, and again, just kind of goes hand in hand with it, right? If you are jumping into something new, something that's basically new to everybody, and the industry is growing, we're building it as we speak. There are not a whole lot of days you're going to be comfortable, right? Things will change, things will move, new blockchains will come around, new way to move money from A to B will come around. You're not going to know about it, right? And at first, at least I know, like at first, sometimes you're in a meeting and people will mention a protocol and you're not familiar with it, and you're I was at least embarrassed, like, man, I didn't know. And today, that doesn't even faze me. Like, oh, another one that I'll look it up, right? Thanks for letting me know, Brian. I'll look it up, right? Just being able, because I think we all want to be experts. We all like to be knowledgeable, be able to contribute. But there's a lot of times you may sit in it as part of investigation, and this thing will spin off into a protocol you've never heard of, you never worked with. So your ability to just go into it and start without any knowledge and kind of dig into it, right? You need to be able to be uncomfortable, right? And not get discouraged through it. You just show up because at the end of the day, man, just like with sports or anything else, you just got to take enough reps to where you become comfortable, right? There's no magic bullet. Might be uncomfortable today, but just show up, consistently, take your reps, and there'll be one day you come in and you won't even know, but it'll be really comfortable.
Nice, nice. And you mentioned here, it was almost like a philosophical point. I kept reading that. I'm like, man, that's so good. What does it mean? My greatest strength is my greatest weakness. How did you kind of come across that? What does that mean to you?
Oh man, that's sort of well, I guess it's kind of funny, a little bit embarrassing, but for the first time I heard that, it was actually a gentleman I had to let go. I fired him. And through the process of that interaction, he said that to me. And at the time, I was just like, man, I didn't. It was early on in my career, right? Young, so I didn't really connect with it. But as my career developed, so it's the same ability, right, to show up and do the work and do the grind, above and beyond, really, that help me be successful in many things, is that same obsession, right, and the willingness, not having the ability to know when to, like, okay, I've chased this down as far as I could. You know, at this point, we're getting to a point of diminishing returns, right? So, like, not being able to recognize that early on, right, has resulted in a lot of mistakes, has resulted in a lot of wrong decisions, right? So it is that very, very same thing, right, that made me successful. It has been a reason for some of my success, is the same thing that's you know been my downfall many times, right? So uh, recognizing it, knowing it, and know that it's there, right? And, I don't really, you never really have a true handle of it, but at least it's there, right? And you're able to kind of ask for input, or at least be agreeable when somebody says, I think we've tapped this out as much as we could, right? Um, is very helpful anyway. So that's what that was about.
No, I like that because it helps, to me, in a couple reasons. It helps you sometimes pull out and see the big picture, see things from a different perspective, and maybe even get, you know, different insight and different ways to attack the problem from other people that can kind of overall, increase your understanding of an issue or fighting it. Um, Oh no, Ervin, I really appreciate you've been extremely gracious with your time. I was really looking forward to doing this interview. And
Thank
I am so glad we allowed ourselves a little bit of wiggle room to go over. I said, let me keep it to like, 30 minutes. I can forget that. Just gonna talk and have fun. But this is really what I want to do as much as possible going forward. And I feel is a true mission of ACFCS is to find professionals like yourself that are experienced, passionate, have the warmth of character to share that knowledge and really give you the platform to do that because, in your investigations, you're helping people on a very granular, tactile way. But to me, by being part of our events, you've spoken at our events, by sharing your stories, by being part of efforts like this, you get to touch a lot of different professionals, maybe even earlier in their career, and really help them kind of be more effective. I say this a lot, but going more from learning to doing and going more from just doing the practice to being effective at whatever they do and also improve their decision making. But yeah, Ervin, thank you so much for doing this. We really appreciate it.
It's been a pleasure, man. Thank you. Thank you.
All right, everyone. Well, we hope you also enjoyed our special multimedia chat here. You'll be seeing this as part of Ervin's published member spotlight. But if you want to get to know Ervin, please reach out to us or get to know ACFCS. We hope to see you back again soon. Bye for now.